All right, so in this tech tip video, we're going to take a look at how to properly debug your workflows to make it easier for you to ultimately develop them and troubleshoot them when things go wrong or your logic needs to be altered and so on. So I'll highlight some tips and tricks to help you with your, ultimate journey with learning how to build sophisticated workflows. So this is actually a workflow that I had previously demonstrated in a video. So if you haven't seen I think it's the query layers tech tip, I'd recommend taking a look at that beforehand. But basically here we have a very basic workflow where we're getting a hold of a layer within our workflow by referencing the layer name from a layer within our web map. In this scenario, we're getting a water lines layer. We're then getting the current map extent, and then basically we're doing a query and we're passing that layer as input. So basically we're saying we're running this query on our water lines layer or against our water lines layer. And then basically here we have a where clause where we're going to find all of the water lines that are of type or material, cast iron and have a diameter less than or equal to 150 millimeters. We're restricting it based on the map extent. We're returning geometry, and we are returning all of the fields. And then I think this last little bit here is we're just getting the number of features returned. So how, again, you can quickly test these workflows is by using the sandbox environment, which I've been using in a few videos here. And again, if we were to run this workflow, you can see here I can return the number of features, and we already started using the network tab as a way to kind of debug your workflow. So here, if we go to the network tab, because we're issuing a web request to ArcGIS server, we can see here, if we look at our header, you can see the full, all the information there, but really all you need to be really concerned with is this payload, which is the input parameter. So this is our geometry, which is coming from our map extent. This is the outfields and our where clause that are being passed to the query. And then if we look at the preview, you can see here, this is our response basically that's being returned. And we have 7 features that are being returned. There's an index of 0. And then here you can see these are the attributes and the individual geometries of each feature. So there's actually an easier way though to actually digest this information, and that's by using the console. So actually if we jump over to the console tab, here you can see if I clear it and rerun it, it's actually logging all of the individual activities that get fired within our workflow. So here we can see we have a get layer activity, we're getting the map extent, we're querying our layer, and then we're presenting an alert. So this basically mimics, this back-end workflow here. So it's showing each of these activities, what the inputs are and what the outputs are for each of those. So if we jump back to the sandbox here, we can take a look at this. So basically, in order to actually get this logging as well, there's a couple of things you need to do. It really depends on the browser that you're using, but basically here I've got Chrome, and here there's this, if you go to the console tab, there's this all levels section, and you're going to want to ensure that you enable verbose logging. Once you have verbose logging enabled, then you should be able to retrieve these more fine-grained activities within your workflow as you run it. So here also each activity is going to basically get run twice, or will get logged twice, and that's because the first time it's run, it's going to basically show you what the inputs are. So we can see here there's this for my get layer activity, there's this layer ID input parameter, and if we jump over here, we can see it's called, layer ID. And here I've supplied water lines, right? Now, the second time you see this log, you'll get both the inputs, but you'll also get the outputs of everything that's available. So here we can see it's been successful because we're getting an output layer, and within this layer, there's all of these other different properties that you can actually pull from within workflow. Now in our scenario for our query layer activity, we just passed this entire layer object as input, but we could also drill down and reference, for example, like the ID of the layer or the name of the layer or potentially even the URL. So this would be pointing to like the REST endpoint of that layer. So there's a whole number of different elements in here that you can actually pull from using the workflow tool. Now, I'm just going to minimize this because it's a little bit overwhelming when you first see it. So if we continue to scroll through, we can see this is our get map extent activity. This one doesn't actually have any inputs, but it'll basically just give you the map extent. And we can see there's the extent or the center point or the current scale. Those are properties that are available. And then if we look at this, I always like to look at the second listing of each activity because it is designed to include both the inputs and the outputs. So if we look at our inputs here, we can see this is our input geometry, which is coming from the map extent, which here you can see this is the map extent, and it is being passed as our input geometry parameter. This is our input layer. Our outfields are set to star, our return geometry is set to true, and the where clause is being included there. If we look at our outputs, this is basically the output response of that query. This is where we can drill into like features and drill into each individual feature and see the individual attributes and the geometry. So rather than having to use the network tab, everything for the most part that you need is included in this console listing here, which makes it really easy to kind of debug and troubleshoot your workflows. Now what's also worth mentioning is here you can see within features there's this length property, and if we hover over there you can see it says outputs.features.length, and it's 7, and when we run the workflow we're getting 7. So you can also use the console to determine what properties are available and then retrieve those. So if we jump to the workflow tab here, you can see and expand this alert. You can see here we're going query1.features.length. Now, it's worth mentioning we don't always display every single property available, but in this scenario we're displaying the length. But for example, if I go into like the layer and add go drill into the layer object and add a period, we're only displaying 4 different properties like the ID, the opacity, and whether it's visible. But if you jump over to the console and expand our layer object, you can see there's a whole ton of other properties available. So for example, if I wanted, the URL of it, I could just go ahead and do layer.url. And if I click OK and rerun this, you can see here we're getting actually this is the URL for the feature service. You'd also have to add an ID onto the end of it. But basically here you can see we're actually going into the layer list, and if we scroll over that URL property, it's going to be layer.layer.url. So hopefully that gives you an overview of how you can use the console as well as the network tab to troubleshoot and debug your workflows. Just to mention, if you wanted to like make a mistake or something like that, like here if I accidentally said, water line and reran it, whoops, and rerun it, you're going to see here it's going to give us an undefined warning. Basically, if we look at our inputs tab, we can see that, oh, my layer input is undefined. And then we can look into our get layer activity and see our inputs are here, but oh, there's no output layer being returned. So that makes, that allows you to then kind of rework and rethink your workflow to then go investigate and say, oh, whoops, I accidentally set this as water line. It should be water lines. So if we go back and update that, clear our console and rerun it, you can see now our water lines input is returning a layer and our query task input has that layer. So again, hopefully that gives you a quick overview of how to use the console to then better troubleshoot and debug your workflows. Thanks for watching.